Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. I do apologize for the extended delay in videos. A while ago my computer kind of had a meltdown. I did try to fix it, wasn't successful, so had to go out and buy a whole new rig. With that being said, if the audio is a little bit off, I'm still trying to figure out my old audio settings. Now, while I was off, there's a whole lot of stories that I wanted to cover. And for today, we're going to be talking about when Trudeau was in Calgary 3-4 days ago, pushing his housing initiative, carbon tax, all that good stuff. Now, I will preface this by saying the video quality can kind of get a little choppy throughout the video due to the actual recording on their side. CPAC and Globe and Mail, who were live streaming it, they had issues with it, so just bear with me. But yeah, without further ado, let's start with this question towards Trudeau.
Hi, Tiffany Goodwin, City News. Premier Danielle Smith recently penned a letter to you criticizing the increase to the carbon tax. She says the carbon tax has increased stress and pain for millions of Canadians, and she's also calling for a meeting to discuss the carbon tax and its impacts. And it's not just Conservatives who are calling for this, Wab Canoe as well. Will you hold a meeting?
I find it interesting that Danielle Smith actually changed her mind on this one. A number of years ago, she was asked about the price on pollution and the Canada carbon rebate that comes with it. And she said she likes it because it puts more money in the pockets of her family. That it actually delivers more while fighting climate change. So it helps with affordability and it helps fight climate change.
Now, if you're unfamiliar with what Trudeau is referring to in regards to Danielle Smith, a few days prior to this, David Cochrane, our favorite CBC guy on Power and Politics, with his panel, discussed this video that's been circulating in the Liberal stream in regards to Danielle Smith talking about the carbon tax. Now, I want you to see how giddy and gleeful these guys are in regards to this.
Heard what Doug Ford had to say. That's quite the pronouncement from the Premier of Ontario. Tim Houston, the Premier of Nova Scotia, has bundled together a series of climate plans that they're executing in Nova Scotia and said, look, this is better than a carbon price. We should be exempt. And Wab Canoe of Manitoba is apparently coming to the table with something similar to that. Where do you think that goes? Because it doesn't sound like it's going to include carbon pricing in any of its form, either through a levy or through cap and trade.
Well, you know, with the Prime Minister putting out the challenge to the premiers, it is interesting that, and as expected, I guess, that provinces are going to step up and put forward what their plans are. And I think that it'll be a lot of words and it will be a lot of reiterating what they're already doing. And as I said, that already is baked into the existing plan. It was very interesting, though, to hear, something dug up from Danielle Smith from just a few years ago, talking about how great the carbon rebate was and how much more that Albertans were getting back rather than paying at the pumps. And I don't know why it took so long for that to surface, but it is pure gold. And I'm sure it will be on mass repeat as much as possible as we get out there and into it. But so far, someone like Dennis Smith hasn't put an alternative on the table. Neither has Doug Ford. Let's see what they have to say.
Well, it's funny that you should mention that because we did want to show that because this is something the Liberals have found to great glee as they have been getting pummeled on carbon pricing for a while now. They dug up this clip that Michelle talked about of Danielle Smith from speaking with the Fraser Institute in 2021. They've been sharing it on Twitter like crazy. Just have a look.
I do my family's taxes, so I know we got $808.50. We get an extra little bump for me and my husband because we live in a rural environment. And when I go back and look at what I spent last year in carbon taxes, because I was working from home, I wasn't commuting, my gas bills were way down, and even the amount of tax that I paid on my home heating, because we're principally natural gas where I live, I would say that I probably ended up better off with that transfer.
Okay, Françoise, now look, there's some context around that. She's working from home during the pandemic. It's a different sort of thing. She says she was comparing it, she said today, to the provincial NDP pricing system that Rachel Notley's government had put in place. But that's an interesting economic analysis there from the Premier of Alberta. Does that change anything in this conversation?
Now, to me, this seemed like a really dumb question that David was posing to the panel here because, as David and Danielle both stated in this video, this was during the pandemic. Times were different. People were working from home. You didn't have to buy gas or fill up your car as much. You probably weren't traveling a lot. You didn't have to heat your house as much. Like, there were things that were put in place that would cause you to get more money from your return because you're not having to pay so much. You're just benefiting from that. That ended quickly after this whole pandemic situation where people started getting called back to the office. People had to drive. I remember the first 2-3 weeks of pandemic, the highway was dead. Shortly after that, it was like pre-pandemic again, even though we were still in the pandemic. So this video is not a gotcha like they think it is. But let's get back to Trudeau now and listen to what he has to say.
And why do people like Danielle Smith and her husband do better because of it? Well, she said, because it puts more money in their pocket and they're able to reduce their emissions, or they're able to walk to work, or whatever it was that you can do that reduces your emissions, actually allows you to keep even more of that rebate that you're not spending on the price on pollution. Which means more money in the pockets of hardworking families. Yes, if you have a giant mansion and an indoor swimming pool and three big personal cars, it might not cover all of that. But for regular families that are hardworking, it puts more money in their pockets.
This guy is so out of touch that he thinks that if you own a mansion, have a pool, and 3 fancy cars, that's the only time you're not going to see more of a rebate back. When, let me tell you, there's a lot of people who are not seeing this rebate that he's talking about, haven't gotten all that money back, and the money that he's going to get back is going to do nothing. Even the parliamentary budget officer, as we've covered many times, has said the inverse of what he said. 8 out of 10 do get more fiscally only, but when you add in the economics, which you can't avoid doing, 8 out of 10, it's actually the inverse. So to me, that would be 8 out of 10 are worse off. But if you remember the beginning of this question, she asked him if he would meet with the premiers, and this is his response to that.
So I'm going to choose to believe Danielle Smith of a few years ago, before she started playing politics, when she said the price on pollution puts more money in the pockets of her and her family than it costs, because that's the reality for 8 out of 10 families across the country.
So I take it that that's a no, that you're not going to have a meeting?
We had a meeting.
And this is hilarious that he says we had a meeting, because the meeting he's talking about is back in 2016. And he actually was on a CBC radio show the other day where he was grilled with the same question and gave that same answer, saying, no, we met in 2016, so I don't have to do it again.
Let me talk about that in a minute. I want to begin with the news of the week in some ways, which is still the carbon tax. No matter what else you seem to speak about, people are focused on the price on carbon. We have seen an increase up to, $80 per ton this week. A liter of gas now costs 3 cents more. Do you think you've made a convincing case to Canadians that that increase is a good thing?
Well, I think we can put the case aside for a second and let's talk about the actual policy.
The case matters because people are protesting, wondering whether this actually works for them. Of course,
the case matters, but let's make sure we're talking about the same thing. We designed a price on pollution in this country that gives more money back to average Canadians, to 8 out of 10 Canadian families, particularly middle income and low income people. So we're not only fighting climate change, we're putting more money in the pockets of folks who need it through the Canada Carbon Rebate. That's the framework we built with all premiers working together back in 2016.
Do you think you've made that case?
I think we're continuing to make that case. It's understandable that at a time of anxiety, of pressure on costs, of affordability concerns, that some politicians are trying to drum up support for themselves by scaring people and by giving misinformation. It's unfortunate, but we're going to continue telling the truth.
So just to be clear, you don't think you've lost the narrative on this? We had a conversation this week with somebody who's a defender of the carbon tax. He explained it. He talked about it as a dumpster fire in terms of how it's rolled out. You don't think you've lost the narrative on this?
I think what we've actually done in the policy it is helping Canadians. Now, the fact that Conservative premiers or the Conservative leader of the opposition wants to take away those supports for Canadians, that's something that people need to hear. And that's not something that they're talking about. So we're continuing to talk about the fact that they have no plan to fight climate change and no plan to keep supporting people with affordability.
Of course, it's not just Conservative premiers, though. It's Wab Kinew in Manitoba. It's a fellow Liberal in Andrew Furey in Newfoundland and Labrador. So Andrew Furey has said that he wants a meeting with you to talk about this. He wants the premiers to come together with you. Will you have that meeting?
I had a meeting in 2016
will
with
you
all
have the,
premiers.
Will you have
when
the
we built
meeting
this.
now with?
I will continue to talk with premiers, but I will continue to be pressing Andrew and all others on the actual facts that we have a plan to fight climate change that puts more money back in the pockets of Canadians that need it.
Now, to me, this seems like such a strange approach, because if all these premiers are coming forward saying they want to scrap the carbon tax, they already have initiatives moving forward to reduce the emissions, and if climate change is your goal, wouldn't just removing the emissions or reducing the emissions be the target itself, not taxing people on the pollution? Like, what's the point of taking the money to give them more money for polluting when the goal is to reduce the amount of pollution and go into more green? If they already have those initiatives and they don't need to tax their people in order to do that, would that not be ideal? But again, as this kind of questioning is coming towards Trudeau, this is what he answers with.
And part of it was that there would be a federal backstop to make sure that pollution wasn't free anywhere across the country. And that federal backstop would put more money in the pockets of Canadians in the areas where it applied. But jurisdictions that wanted to do that pricing differently could do it in different ways. Quebec moved forward with a cap and trade system. BC has had a price on pollution for a long time. They're not part of the federal program. Ontario, now this is a nice irony, Ontario actually started a cap and trade program. It was scrapped by Doug Ford when he first got elected, which means the federal price on pollution that he is now complaining about is in because he got rid of the conservative cap and trade program that existed when he got elected. And now he's complaining about the federal backstop that he chose to bring in for Ontarians.
Now, again, as I've mentioned before on this channel, I'm not a huge Doug Ford fan, but it doesn't really sound like he chose to bring in this federal carbon tax. It sounds like he pretty much had no other option, because it was either cap and trade as your main thing, but if you got rid of it, then the federal backstop was forced upon you guys. So he says he wants to work with them, reduce emissions and whatever ideas they have. Well, if they're putting forward, again, as I said, ideas to bring down emissions that don't require taxing people, then why is he so focused on getting this tax to give a rebate that's bigger than what you put in? And, you know, Doug Ford actually 2-3 days ago responded to this kind of questioning by the press, and this is what he had to say.
Hi, Premier. Davis Legree, iPolitics. Earlier today, you wrote a letter to Prime Minister Trudeau calling for a First Minister's meeting over the carbon tax. You've been very vocal in your opposition to the federal carbon tax.
Yes.
And I'm just wondering where that outrage comes from, considering your government's decision to get rid of cap and trade in 2018 effectively signed Ontario up for the federal backstop.
Well, you just have to talk to the people. It's driving up the cost. You're driving around, going and fill up your gas. It's $1.61 or $1.60. Thunder Bay was at almost $1.70. It drives up the cost of absolutely everything. Drives up the cost of groceries. Drives up the cost of picking up your child from daycare, for example. Driving home, and we're trying to fight inflation, and we're trying to convince the Bank of Canada to lower the rate. Which they haven't, and all of a sudden you have the federal government jacking up inflation through the carbon tax. It's unacceptable. It really is. And they're taking more money in than they're giving back. This is a no-brainer. The number one issue out there is affordable homes, affordable groceries, affordable fuel, and it makes companies uncompetitive. So the province is pushing on one side, driving the economy. The feds are driving the inflation, and the Bank of Canada is sitting on their hands while people are going to be annihilated in a year or 2 years when they have to renew their mortgage. So they need to get their act together, lower the cost of everything across the board, and it just goes to show you that in other jurisdictions that don't have the carbon tax, the inflation rate is down. So this is a no-brainer. I just can't understand where they're going. They're hurting people, bottom line, and we need to be there to support people, not hurt them.
But you have the option to introduce an alternative system. The only reason we're susceptible to that increase to the federal carbon tax is because you scrapped cap and trade. If you go across the river to Quebec, it's a non-issue there because they have that system in place. Are you considering bringing forward an alternative?
Hold on, they should get rid of this, totally. The carbon tax drives up the cost of everything, makes our companies uncompetitive, drives up the cost of food and fuel, and everything moves by transportation. Why do we need it?
Why do we need it? Indeed. As I've stated, if the goal is to reduce emissions and you can do that without taxing the people, let's do that. But it's interesting that they continuously talk about Quebec and British Columbia, when just a few days ago as well, there was a press conference held by two men from Quebec who were against this and basically calling for a referendum and resignation of Trudeau. And I think this man echoes what most Canadians are saying and thinking and feeling.
My name is Robert Dariel, and you probably don't know me, and for good reasons. I'm not a politician. I'm not an organizer of any sorts. I'm just, to put it simple, a Canadian, a proud Canadian. I stand here today at the risk of being humiliated and fumbling in a press conference, which I've never done before, because I think it's important to act when something is wrong in our country. I believe we live in one of the most beautiful countries in the world. I truly believe that. I don't want to see this country go sideways like it's going right now. I want this country to be proud. I want my children to be proud, and I want it to be a good place like it's always been. Presently, we're having issues, and we've been having issues for the last few years. The last straw was this carbon tax that Mr. Trudeau imposed on April 1st. Now, some people will say Quebec is not affected. I am from Quebec. That's not true. We've been paying an environmental tax on fuel for a long time, and it's been hidden from us, and we're just learning about it. There's BC as well that's not paying this carbon tax. But the reality of all of this is that everybody in Canada will be affected because the goods that we're buying and purchasing in Quebec and any other province are all going to be affected by this tax hike. We've already seen the impact on the price of food, the price of heating, and all kinds of other items that we need to survive. This is a very bad move. That is why, in my opinion, we see so many people protesting right now. They're doing it in a very legal and respectful way. They're not blocking roads. They're not causing any trouble. We are really good Canadians trying to get a message across, and that is the right thing to do in a democracy. Justin Trudeau is always proud to stand up on a podium and say how he is a great defender of democracy across the world, ready to spend hundreds of millions of dollars in Ukraine and other countries to secure democracy. Why won't he apply those same rules in our country? When 386,000 Canadians signed the largest petition ever in Canada asking him to resign or to call elections, he brushed it off. In my opinion, that's not democracy. Did not even address the question. I think that we are at a crossroad right now. Canadians are standing up. We are doing it in a peaceful manner. We are using the tools at our disposition, like we're doing right now, expressing ourselves, expressing our concerns, going out of our way to do press conferences, which we never do. Anybody looking at this, watching this, should realize that this is not normal. This whole scenario is not normal. You don't see regular Canadians standing up, doing a press conference, trying to get the government to listen. And there's a reason for that. We have hit a low point. We can't take it anymore. And I'm talking for a lot of Canadians. I can't speak for all of them, but a lot of them. This needs to be addressed. Our Prime Minister, who is so keen on democracy, should do the basic thing in a democracy and listen to his people. So on that, I'd like to thank you very much for your time. I hope this message will get across. Keep your heads up and be proud. Thank you.
And that couldn't have been said any better. This man, you could feel the passion towards the beginning of his speech when he's talking about being a proud Canadian. He started to well up, and he had to take a moment there. And he's right. It's not normal to be seeing everyday Canadians coming to parliamentary buildings, doing press conferences to try to get across to the government that you're actually hurting your citizens. And as he mentioned, the biggest petition ever signed to talk about getting rid of the carbon tax or calling an election or having Trudeau resign was just ignored, even though it was brought up multiple times in the House of Commons and discussion and everything. He just doesn't care. This guy's an egomaniac. But hey, this is just my opinion on this whole situation. Let me know what you guys think about this in the comment section below. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button. And as always, I'll catch you guys on the next one. Thanks so much.